So what do you figure was the biggest question I got from everyone I knew when I started this whole thing? And welcome back to Cliffieland. This is Week in Country number 185 on our second attempt of cooking the food of every single country in the world. And tonight we're to the nation of the United States of America. Yes, folks, we made it to this place right here. What can I tell you about the U.S. that you don't already know? The U.S. is one of the world's largest countries. It takes up most of the central part of North America, from sea to shining sea, as it were, as well as the vast expanse of Alaska and the Hawaiian Islands in the Pacific. Also includes the District of Columbia, where Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, is located, which is not a state, as well as a number of other territories, including Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and my familial home of Puerto Rico, which we may be getting to later in this whole thing. But about the food. That brings us to an interesting situation, in that when I started this whole thing about 9 years ago, gosh, over 9 years ago now, the number one question I got from everyone I knew, or at least every American person I knew, is, what the heck are you going to do for the US when you get to it? Well, considering that that was about 4 years in the future at that point, I didn't think that was a particularly important question, but as time went on, it became more central to what we're doing. And that's because the US is colloquially known as a nation of immigrants, which is in large part true, except for those jillion Native Americans that were here before European colonizers arrived. And theirs is the original American food. After that, you had the food of the European colonizers. That would be the British, the Spanish, the French, and yes, the Russians. And then eventually any number of Europeans, Germans, Italians, Eastern Europeans that came, as well as, let's not forget, the zillion enslaved African people that were brought over and brought their distinct cuisines, which became the melange that is African American soul food. Later on, the food of China came to be a part of the American cuisine, and then eventually the foods of everywhere else in Asia, Africa, South and Central America, the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, etc. Now, what people most think of in terms of American food, though, is fast food, which would be your hot dogs, hamburgers, french fries, pizza, fried chicken, the great export that we've sent to the rest of the world, which, for better or worse, is what it is. But that's not what we're doing. We had to face this whole thing last time around, so let's look and see how I dealt with it 5 years ago. So last time around on the Global Cooking Challenge, I got to cook and stream across 3 nights, and on the first night I tried to do a collection of Native American dishes that were some of the favorites that I've had at the Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C., where I sampled some really terrific things multiple times. So for that I made a chili, I made a succotash, and a few other things, and those were really, really great. And on the second night I did what amounts to a 4th of July barbecue food, which is, or 4th of July picnic, as it were, which I made fried chicken, a biscuit, and coleslaw. And that's a large part influenced by Southern traditions, but you know, it kind of covers the whole country as well. And that was spectacularly good, and in true American tradition, there was enough food to feed an army, even though it's just the 2 of us. But we're not doing that tonight. What we are doing is what we did on the 3rd night, which is something which is very near and dear to my heart, which helps me kind of understand why people from every other country are so, shall we say, protective of their foods from their countries, because it's so close to their hearts. And that is Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving dinner is that one meal that is shared in some form or other by just about everyone in the US in their own special way on one Thursday in November. And usually that's centered around turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes, which Americans incorrectly call yams. That's a whole other story. But what makes it special is that everyone brings to it their own cultural and ethnic traditions. Vegans will make a free-range tofurkey instead of a turkey. People from Italian backgrounds may have a pasta dish. People from a Chinese background may bring in dumplings. My own Puerto Rican family will bring in arroz con gandules, which is rice with pigeon peas, and pasteles, which is a form of a tamale of sorts. So everyone brings their own thing to Thanksgiving dinner, and that's what makes the melange that is America and this one truly American thing, culinarily speaking, to us. So last time around, I made chicken thighs because I wasn't going to be roasting an entire chicken with stuffing and potatoes, and I made sweet potatoes on the side, and again, that was a metric ton of food, even though we don't use the metric system here. That's just us in Liberia for that one. And this is going to be an epic one, so brace yourself. We need to see what go into tonight's dishes. First, for our roast turkey with stuffing, we'll need 2 turkey thighs, a handful of garlic peeled, a handful of pearl onions peeled, 4 small potatoes cut into chunks, 2 cups of unsalted chicken broth, 2 sprigs of sage, 2 sprigs of rosemary, 2 sprigs of parsley, and 2 bay leaves, a sprinkle of olive oil, flour, and salt and pepper to taste. Then for our sweet potatoes, we'll need 2 medium sweet potatoes, cooked and peeled, a half a cup of packed brown sugar, 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of water, a quarter teaspoon of salt, and a dash of ground nutmeg or mace. And finally, for our whole grain classic stuffing, we'll need 1 loaf of artisan whole grain bread, cubed, about 9 to 10 cups, 1 large onion, diced, 3 stalks of celery, chopped, 2 leeks, chopped, 2 tablespoons of fresh sage leaves, chopped, 2 tablespoons of fresh parsley, chopped, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, fresh ground black pepper, and 3 cups of vegetable broth. Well, this is going to be really good, and I know there's going to be a lot of leftovers, so we need to get cooking. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Let the turkey thighs sit at room temperature for about 30 minutes before cooking. Gather a few leaves from each herb sprig and finely chop to make about 2 teaspoons each. Rub the chopped herbs onto each side of the turkey thighs, along with the sprinkle of salt and pepper. Place the thighs skin side down in a deep roasting pan and bake for about 30 minutes. Turn the thighs over, then add the potatoes, pearl onions, bay leaves, and herb sprigs. Pour in the broth and sprinkle all with a little more salt and pepper, and then drizzle some olive oil on top. Roast for another 30 to 40 minutes until the thighs are done and the potatoes are tender. Stir the potatoes once during roasting. Remove the pan from the oven and let the thighs and potatoes sit covered with foil for about 20 minutes before serving. Then for the gravy, strain the leftover broth into a small pan, turn the heat on high and whisk in flour a little at a time for your desired thickness. If needed, add salt and pepper and pour into a gravy vessel. Cut the potatoes into chunks, transfer to a 1-quart baking dish, and set aside. In a small saucepan, combine the brown sugar, water, and salt and bring to a boil, and pour over the potatoes. Bake uncovered at 350 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes or until the syrup thickens, basting occasionally. Sprinkle with nutmeg. Preheat your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Cut the bread into cubes. Place on a baking sheet and bake for 15 to 25 minutes until browned and toasted, stirring and checking occasionally. In a skillet, heat the olive oil over medium-high heat. Add the celery, onion, and leeks with a few pinches of kosher salt. Cook for 6 to 8 minutes, stirring frequently until tender. Remove from the heat and then stir in the herbs. Place the bread cubes and vegetables in a bowl, add 1 teaspoon of kosher salt and a generous amount of fresh ground black pepper, and mix to combine. Pour the mixture into a 9x13 baking dish and add 3 cups of vegetable broth. Cover and bake for 20 minutes. Uncover and bake for about 25 minutes until browned. Optimally, you would serve everything family style, but we are plating individual portions. How did it all turn out? Well, it was heartwarming. It was lovely. It was a version of that which I adore every November, even though it's October here right now. Let's start off with those chicken thighs. They were really delicious. They were juicy, although I did kind of goof at the end, because while I did do it in the cast iron Dutch oven, which did have that cast iron thing which gave the skin a good amount of crispiness initially, one of the problems was that at the end I was supposed to cover it with foil. Instead, I covered it with the lid of the Dutch oven, which let it sit and cook a little bit too much. So the turkey was a little bit overdone. That was a me problem. Otherwise, it was super delicious. Gonna give that one 4 out of 5 globes. As for the sweet potatoes, those were simple, delicious, sweet, savory. They didn't have the usual marshmallow on top that most Americans will have because A, I find that a little strange, and B, it's not in the recipe. So that one gets 5 out of 5 globes because it was super delicious and just the right amount of food. As for that stuffing, that was fantastic. I did make a mistake and I made the entire recipe, which really is for like an entire Thanksgiving dinner food. But still, it was very, very tasty. I enjoyed it a lot. I wound up giving most of it away because I was not going to eat that much stuffing. But that one gets 4 out of 5 globes as well. So that does it for the US of A. Thank you for joining us. Next week we head south to South America to have the fantastic food of the nation of Uruguay. See you then. These are not my original recipes. Links to the original recipes and their authors can be found in the About section. If you have any thoughtful feelings or helpful suggestions about what I'm doing, feel free to sound off in the comments here. If you like what you see, like, subscribe, hit that bell to be notified when these videos are posted, and of course you can always follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Thanks for coming by. See you next time. Happy eating.